and welcome to this session. Welcome to the participant online. Welcome to our participant here. We have we're hoping to have a lively discussion today to discuss the role of de-risking in agribusiness sector and agriculture. So we have some slides for you. Okay, excellent. So, good? Okay, excellent. Okay, let's go back to... Okay, so my name is Kautar Zarweli, and I'm a global lead for nature and climate within United Nations Capital Development Fund. We exist since 1966, and our core mandate is inject and work with the local economy. Rich local economy is nothing else but rich private sector. I lead the Food Security Accelerator in Africa, and we work to support innovative agribusinesses in the entire continent, because for us, the agribusiness cannot be really flourish without the support of the innovative ideas. Business cannot be as usual when it comes to agriculture. So innovative agriculture comes from the small businesses, comes from the farmers, come from the innovative ideas that come to de-risking. We cannot flourish the agriculture business, we cannot talk about food security, we cannot talk about the next generation agriculture if we do not talk about de-risking. And why de-risking? Because we really need to believe and support this new ideas in the agriculture. That's why we call it the next generation agriculture, because they are too risky for the commercial market. They are too risky for the big investors. So, and then especially when it comes to climate security, they are the most vulnerable. These local communities, these farmers, this is why we talk about climate justice. So how can we support them so they can be ready to face these shocks? And then we talk about nature as well. So what we wanted to do is how can we support these agribusinesses so nature can give us a long-term resources and not about now, it's about now and the future. So, so we are looking for strategic partners for us really to support these local communities. If we want green businesses, if nothing else, they need an injection, strong, big injection of capital at the beginning, because the green technology is still expensive. And these small businesses, they don't have that. So for us in UNCDF, we have a de-risking approach that combines the injection of the capital at front, so we can support them to buy the green innovative technology, but also the technical assistance. Technical assistance comes from the subject matter, comes from the know-how on how to use these green technologies and support them to have a business model that's sustainable and resilient. And when we talk about sustainable and resilient, we talk about climate sustainable and climate resilient. So blended finance, when we say blended finance, what is blended finance? Blended finance, it's a mix of investment tools that really cater to the specific need of each of these businesses. So it can be a combination of working capital grants to concessional loans. And then it can go from injection of the capital to technical assistance as well. So our de-risking in UNCDF has 3 layers. The de-risking, it comes from technical assistance from the subject matter. So when we work with tea plantation or when we work with honey farm, it's really how can we support the small farmers, the small agribusinesses, so they can be inspired and learn from others. So it's the ecosystem. The number 2 pillar that we work with, it's the injection of the capital, which is the support. So, and then number 3 is the technical assistance when it comes from financial sustainability. And we work them so that we can help them have a business model that has a profit in the making. So those are our core principles when we talk about the de-risking. I think I already talked about this. Framing. So this is when it comes to the nexus about. That's yours. Okay, then I'll give you the.
Thank you, Qatar. I think this is a great conversation to be having between de-risking. Proforest, as an organization, we work with supply chain companies on the implementation of their sustainability commitments across people, nature, and climate. But actually, the new buzzword that companies are starting to use is resilience, linking all of these together, where de-risking is a really key part of the conversation when talking about responsible investment. Now, what we wanted to share with you today is our view on things when it comes to integrating people, climate, and nature goals. We see that there's a very robust case for linking all of these 3 pillars together in ESG strategies based on, as I already mentioned, the need for supply chain resilience, protecting against reputational risks, regulatory compliance, strategic efficiency and synergy, as well as access to finance and de-risking this interaction with financial actors. Now, how we work with companies, in our work with companies, we see that very often policies, project budgets, and especially teams are still very siloed. So us, Proforest, we often work with the forest team. I, as a climate lead, work often with the climate teams. Then there's a people team, there is a procurement team, and all of these need to work together. But even internally, often companies are not able to make these links just yet. So at Proforest, we have a project with AIM Progress, which is a global company coalition on human rights, to start figuring out what is this just transition, linking all of these goals together within the food and agricultural sector. Now, we have some preliminary findings. We don't have all of the answers just yet. It is, as we know, the just transition was very much developed in the energy sector, in the food and ag sector. We're starting to help companies take these first steps. And I think it helps to understand where we find most of these companies starting to make these links. So as you see on this graphic, Level 1, it is really about human rights safeguard. That's the minimum that we see in climate projects. It is where we are looking at human rights safeguards within these projects. And even that is not present in all companies. Level 2 would be looking at the addressing physical climate risks for the people that are engaged in your supply chain. So that means not only the producer companies, but also their workers, smallholders, and local communities within production landscapes. So it's very important that all of these groups are part of the conversation when we talk about the just transition. Then the level 3, and I'm not sure if there are many companies that we would put into this box, but we imagine that this is where we want to be moving to. Just transition planning by really clear collaboration between climate and human rights teams to ensure that they are working together towards the same goals. And I'll give a small example of what I'm talking about in the next slide. Then the ideal scenario, but as we were discussing before this session, we are not sure how, it is quite ambitious, but we really think this is where we need to get to in a world with a changing climate, is a strategic partnership between people, nature, and climate teams to work together, and one set of KPIs really that links them all together. I'm bringing to you 2 specific examples of where we can pull inspiration from. So one from the corporate side of things, and then I'll hand over to our partner, Dr. Ollie Owen, that works for the Equity State Government. But first, the corporate side of things. This is a specific example from one of our partners within the AIM Progress project, a downstream company from the food and agricultural sector. So, instead of doing a risk assessment only for human rights or only for deforestation and conversion, what they have done is this integrated model of looking at people, climate, and nature risks and putting that all on the same map. They then used the results to integrate these existing policies into one single resilience frameworks and really looked at a prioritization across of all the KPIs. It wasn't just, I'm going to engage this landscape because it has a deforestation risk, or this one because there is a labor risk. No, we're looking at all of these KPIs together and implementing actions across them all. And one specific example of that is that in sugar, we work in sugarcane, specifically in Mexico, in the Philippines, we work in Brazil. And we see that mechanization is often something promoted to reduce labor risks, as well as reducing emissions and other nature risks. Now, those are the positive impacts of this strategy. We also see that it can have a negative impact on livelihoods. So the idea here is that instead of only looking at, I'm reducing my emissions, check, that we look at the full impact of this project and the benefits that could be shared with the workers that are going through this transition, with a livelihoods transition plan, for example, including retraining and alternative income programs. And now I would like to hand over to Dr. Ali, but before I do so, I do want to really thank him for reaching out. I think we will have a great example of kind of a new chance at doing sustainable agricultural production right. And the framing he gave me is that in Nigeria, due to food inflation prices as well as the oil export going down, the company is now looking at the expansion of their food production as well as their food export. And that means that there is now a gap for the government, the companies, and their partners to look at expansion in the country in a sustainable way. And I would love for Dr. Ali to come up here and give us a few more details of this inspiring example within the country of Nigeria.
So, thank you very much, Pauline. I've been given mic training. I'm told I have to keep it here like a football commentator, or I can do this like a rapper. I don't know which one you like. Yeah, I can change from one to the other, make it more exciting. Okay. I was told not to do that as well, because then you can't see me. I think there's three aspects to what we've been talking about. The effect on climate, the effect on people, and how corporates tie into that. So we wanted to give this example, partly because we've been working with Proforest on it to develop it. And Proforest have really been a partner of choice for Ekiti State, because we saw what Proforest did implementing the Africa Sustainable Commodities Initiative in Edo State in Nigeria when oil palm development was really coming on and oil palm majors were coming in. And they really transformed the landscape, and the question there was how to do that fairly and without causing deforestation. We have a slightly different issue. We have a landscape that's more about SMEs and smallholder farmers. And we have a landscape. Nigeria it used to be an oil state. It's transitioning away from oil. Agriculture is more important. Agriculture mainly driven in Nigeria by SMEs. And that could mean small family farms, 1-2 hectares, or it could mean people who've maybe amassed some savings and investment in the diaspora or from other walks of life and are doing something of 50 or 100 hectares. And then how do they plug into global supply chains? Well, that linkage is just starting to be rekindled. And one of the big linkages that's rekindled it is cocoa, because there's been a global cocoa boom in the last 3 years. Nigerian economy was built on cocoa, especially southwest Nigeria in the 1960s. It was built on cocoa, and then that really went down. There wasn't much investment in cocoa. That actually had some beneficial effects. One of them is that unlike countries like Nigeria that put a lot of effort into, inverted commas, modernizing cocoa by saying, cut all the trees down on your plantation, that didn't happen in all of the plantations in Nigeria. So there's some residual knowledge about how to use agroforestry and trees in cocoa landscapes that we're building on. So 3 aspects: corporates, climate, and also people. So a little example of how we've touched on each of those. There are other things we could talk about after if you're interested. But in corporates, one of the really useful things about the Africa Sustainable Commodities Initiative is that you build policy with the companies involved from the ground up. So in Ekiti State, that's involved small farmer associations, because it's quite a well-organized sector. You have associations and they have a district-level organization, so you have those representatives. Then you have the buyers of commodities like cocoa and palm oil who are trading it to the off-takers. We don't yet have any major off-takers themselves because they like to work through intermediaries, but it's a well-organized intermediary process with traceability possibilities embedded in it. It's not like cocoa in Ghana where you have a warehousing system. You can actually trace through the buyer to the farm in the Nigerian system. Then we have these SME players who are coming in. And it's really nice to see money coming into the system to not only do agriculture, but also people are starting to invest in afforestation. The state government has some tax relief for afforestation projects if you're doing a private timber plantation. So there are some ways of incorporating corporates in designing the policy and making sure that it's market friendly, it's going to plug in. Secondly, the other thing we did with Proforest is a land use land cover survey, very essential for two reasons. One is to make sure that with the coming of EUDR and deforestation-free regulation, we can ensure that the farm that it's being sourced from is in an area that's been deforested for more than 10 years. It's not an area of forest regrowth. It's not in a conserved area. Really, really important for us to be able to map that and have that vector mapping so that we have that traceability. Secondly, we have a lot of demands on land. We can reforest certain areas, we can allow other areas to naturally regrow, we can have conservation corridors, but people want to do commercial farming and they have to be able to do it. So we can optimally zone that to make sure that it has the least negative footprint. But we couldn't do that without that. Before that, we're working from hand-drawn maps from the 1950s in our forest reserves. So it's really, really essential. And there's a knock-on in terms of employment because in doing this mapping, we've also been able to train a lot of people in the technical department of Forestry Commission. So now they've been upskilled and they can now pass those skills on and use more GIS mapping techniques in their work. And the third one, just to touch on, is benefit sharing mechanisms. Nigeria has a carbon markets framework it's just done. Maybe I should go to rapper style for the carbon markets. I don't know. I don't think that's as good. It's certainly more of an ache. Let me keep it like this. Carbon markets framework in Nigeria has just been released in the last month before COP. It's a good carbon markets framework. It's private sector friendly. It's voluntary markets oriented. It's not too bureaucratic. We had a bit of input in that. But as a subnational states in Nigeria, Nigeria runs a system like Brazil. It's a federal system. So subnational states have a lot of rights over land and forest, which we can plan ourselves. So we don't just want to wait on the national framework. We want to have some local frameworks that move at the speed they can move. So we looked at benefit sharing frameworks for carbon schemes and nature-based solutions. And one thing that we really identified is that trying to domesticate global compacts is hard and messy and unworkable. So instead we work upwards from what people work with in Nigerian law already. Land law, and there's a category of law in Nigeria that deals with economic trees. So we derive from these and then have a benefit sharing guideline that gives people some minimum benefits, community, local government, landowner, developer, and then an area of negotiable benefit. So it's like a pie chart approach, which then can be tailored to fit who's putting the investment, what the land is worth, how people want to derive benefits. So we just feel that we've been trying to work in all of these from local realities upwards. And I think that's a really, really important lesson that we've learned looking at this sector, because a lot of it is looking at what global supply chains want or global compacts want downwards. I think it's really, really important in all the contexts we work to build upwards in terms of governance and say, what do people already understand? And that's not necessarily always in the box about indigenous peoples and locals communities. It doesn't have to be tradition. It can also be local law that people use for everyday purposes. It's really, really important in these compacts to build up to meet those demands as well as down to meet the global processes. I think that's about what I can tell you for now. I should hand back. Thank you.
Okay, so now we want to have a live discussion. And we know, and I was already looking at who is here that I know, and I know that you have some good experience to share on how companies can work with other stakeholders on addressing just transition. We already heard from how governments can do that as well. And what is the role of blended finance if we can find one in there? Like just transition is not as easy as when we talk about regen ag, practices for larger farmers that will have like a track record of paying loans back. But when we talk about blended finance, what is the role that it can play in promoting just transition? I would like to propose that we literally move the chairs, sit in a circle, and have this discussion. And I have a few questions that it would be good to hear from you. And we can use this and complement with the others. So please join us. Welcome. This session is still being live streamed, so that's why we were using the microphone. Not because we cannot hear each other, but I think it also makes it easier. So, first of all, we are at the end of COP, and I've been in multiple sessions talking about just transition, and to me, it's not yet clear what it is. So I think first question it will be to hear from your perspectives and experience, what are the elements that companies would need to consider when developing or being part of just transition programs? And the second question is, what is the role of partnerships with governments, including, or philanthropies, including the possibility of blended finance in promoting that? Jeff, can I invite you to start just on like briefly AFI and what do we have on just transition? What AFI is for the others that I don't know if know, but what do you have as guiding principles for companies that link to just transition? And I don't know all of you, but Fabi, I think it would be really good to hear like a Magi being a company that is on the ground, that has so much relationship, so much connection with smallholders that are not even in your supply chain. What is just transition from your experience? But Jeff, and then it would be lovely to hear from others and also from our speakers.
Hello, I'm Jeff Milder. I lead the Accountability Framework Initiative. I feel like this is a test of our stamina, like with this heat on the second to last day of COP. So we're a coalition of about 24 environmental and human rights NGOs, and we try to provide a common global reference for companies in the agriculture and forestry sectors, what they need to do to achieve a responsible supply chain. Our initiative was sort of born out of the situation 9 or 10 years ago where companies had made commitments around no deforestation and no land grabbing, things like that. But there wasn't really a clear implementation roadmap. We didn't have common metrics. And so we realized that in order to scale up responsible practice, there needed to be some standardization and alignment. So our coalition did that. We have a global reference called the Accountability Framework that a lot of companies follow, and it's also used by policymakers and others. So in terms of what it calls for a just transition, we focus on deforestation and conversion because we see those as really important proxies for protection of ecosystem services, biodiversity, and also the reliance that local people have on forests. But we also cover human rights, including workers' rights and livelihoods, for instance, payment of a living wage and living income. Those are elements that are more difficult for companies to achieve because they actually require changing the means of livelihood on the ground. So I would say we very much come to companies with an idea that environmental and human rights issues and risks need to be managed in an integrated way, and that there's a clear set of sort of proof points and metrics that we look to institutionalize as widely as we can. That being said, I think the questions that you asked, Johnny, are really challenging ones that we don't yet provide really clear answers on, and they're very situational.
So it's a complex question. It's not so easy to answer, but I think it's so good to share our experience about how it's possible to work with the challenges with human rights and environmental issues. So Amage is a agribusiness company. We produce soybeans, corn, and the cotton, and they buy grains for producers as well. So, and our supply it's so big, and you need to work with a lot of states and countries. So because of this, we try to define the prioritize areas that you need to work. And you have the matrix to understand how the areas will have the more impacts for deforestation and for human rights as well. We try to cruise this information and define the areas that you need to address our projects and try to listen the communities. I think when you talked about the justice, it's not so easy to define because it is, I think it's so important to listen the community what's important for them. So you try to do this. So for specific projects that you have with the communities, for example, have the project with the smallholders that will listen what the main problems that they have inside the process to produce the all the things the agriculture producer and the main point is normally you don't have the governance to work with the big companies, so it's necessary to help them the structure to supply the big companies. So it's the first one, and the other one is demand. So for them it's a little challenges to understand the demands that you have and define the volumes it's possible to produce. Because this will try to define the strategy to work with them. And for some regions, you guarantee the demand for the products for the agriculture producers, the smallholders, for our restaurants inside the Amage. So you guarantee the demands and it's possible to work with them, with regenerative agricultures as well, and about the problems that you have in infrastructure to produce for support the demand. So I think it's this, and I think we need to work with the smallholders, what challenge that they have and what's possible to do together. So I think this the main points that it's in our perspective.
Super, thank you. And do we have the clickers still? Because I think the slide that Pauline showed, yeah, here, it's really like there is a need to integrate, right, human rights into and put people in the center and integrate human rights into companies' practices. But it's much easier for us to see what that means in this initial level, right? Like it's really like safeguards, addressing risk. I understand where my risk is and I do something about it. I think, and this is what AFI is kind of doing quite a lot. What Amage is doing is probably already going into level 2, like it's not only addressing the physical impacts, and also looking into climate change agora, now with the Regenera and looking at Regeneg with the smallholders as well. And it's really looking towards, and when we were preparing this presentation, we were struggling to find examples that are already fully addressing, because it seems like so ambitious to really do like strategic integration of climate and human rights at policy, governance, and implementation levels. And it really demands this engagement that we have from Oli sharing in Nigeria, like before the implementation of new frontiers, you start looking at how can I help this community to transition towards like sustainable production when production is increasing. And what we have in many places and in Brazil is production is already there. So the transition has happened. Now we need to transition to something else. It's yet another level. I would love to hear if you feel comfortable in sharing like who you are, where you work, if you have any experience with Just Transition that you would like to share.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a graduate student currently studying at Indiana University in the US, but I'm from Mongolia. So before going to the US, I was working in a project with UNDP, and it was a project of biodiversity as well as called Sustainable Kashmir Platform. So yeah, just transition, when we talk about, just transition, we also tend to leave the rights of animals as well as the rights of nature. So let's say when we put, for example, renewable, solar panels, full of solar panels on the step, and then we put all these barriers. There are also animals living there, so they also lose their space. So we shouldn't talk only about human rights. We also have to talk about animal rights, the nature of law of nature, rights of nature. So yeah, it's very diverse. So we don't know. Yeah.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for this surprising event. So my name is Julian. I work for People in Need. We are an organization based in Czech Republic. We work in 40 countries. So I'm climate lead for the organization, overseeing our program related to climate resilience. I was thinking while the discussion was starting, what I could say about just transition, and what could be the role. We have been pushing a lot on, and we're working a lot with local civil society organizations in different countries. So how we can have more inclusive processes to make sure that the voices from these organizations, local groups, are included in national policies, but even at local level on private sector involvement. For example, now in 3 countries where we are working, in Africa, Zambia, Angola, and DRC, there is this new global gateway initiative from the EU around the Lobito corridor, which there is a lot of events currently happening there in country, and what we try to do, and we launched recently a corridor initiative, which is how we can bring civil society organization, but also small and local private sector actors to be more recognized, because the risk obviously is that these large investments coming from European development banks will just reach large multinational companies, and it will just be small benefits from, if any, from the community. So that's an example of just transition that can happen for this type of program. What else? Another point is to have this more multi-stakeholder platform at national or local level. So in other country, in Ethiopia, we have this combining private sector education actors like TVET centers to have more business-oriented skills development approach. So to make sure that the skills creation, skills development are in line with what the local private sector or private sector in the area are expecting. So if it's related to renewable energy or whatever, so how we can make sure that the skills are there. So that's in this type of platform. So it's about skills creation, but can be other topics can be obviously can come in this discussion. And there was another point. Yeah, no, it was mentioned here, I think, in the slides, make sure that the climate risks are taken in consideration when you are developing your businesses, and make sure that you have all these elements from the beginning, and that the communities are informed. So, you do something, but 2 years after, it's completely destroyed by some flood or drought or whatever. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Very, I think, different perspectives. That's very enriching the conversation, and then letting us really think from different perspectives. But the perspective that I wanted to share is why just transition, and we need to understand what is the incentive of this private sectors, of these companies, to go this road. Because at the end, they are for-profit companies that are trying to serve their communities, but as well to survive. So we will need to think of how to not overburden these companies as well. From our experience, it's in terms of like, it's not like you need to have a gender policy, human rights policy, anti-corruption policy. Like, why do we need these policies? It's not just to check the point, and but what's the added value? What is the incentive that you can put there for these companies to see that this is something to their own benefit and the benefits of the communities that they serve? So one of the incentives is the expansion of the market, which helps as well in terms of the food waste management, because a lot of these small companies, sometimes they have some product or produce that they don't know what to do with it. So how can we help them expand their market? But then the expansion of the market, and mostly in the continent that I work in, which is Africa, is EU or the US market. So there are many certifications that they need to pass in order for them to be eligible to enter that market. And this is one of the win-win situation as well, in terms of course, they don't have the means. These certifications are long-term process, so it's a long-term engagement, and they are heavy as well in terms of the pricing. So those are what we are looking into when I talked about the technical assistance, is how can we incentivize, how can we make it a win-win situation, and how can we help these small organizations or these small companies to see the added value of them to add in, because all of these come sometimes as an extra burden, because it's not that they don't want to do it, but they don't have the technical means and the financial means.
Thanks. I think it's really important to refocus it on the practical issues when you're looking down the barrel of this as a company. I wasn't just playing with my phone. I've been getting some comment from my colleagues in Nigeria that are following. Thanks for joining. So from Dr. Akinyemi Akinyuga, who's my counterpart who works on green economy, is pointing out that working with smallholders becomes a lot simpler and a lot more empowering if you can group them, as we're trying to do, into cooperatives so that they can have a more powerful collective voice and articulate better themselves. I think that's really key, because there is this transaction cost that a company will have working with people if you're working with 1,000 non-organized people, or you can work with 10 groups. That's really key. So at our end, at a state government end, to help people structure the environment so that when a company comes in, you can say, plug into it. And so I think the second point is that something like ASCI is great because it's a landscape level structure. Everyone understands it. There's a rights element, there's a labor element, there's an environment element, so you just plug into it. Equally, you could say the same thing for industry specific things like forestry stewardship certification. If smallholders can be grouped through that, and now FSC has a smallholder scheme, this is great because everybody understands what that is. The market understands what that is, the environment sector understands what that is, and so forth. So I think this thing of making things legible is very key. Then the other angle is also to give people the tools to participate on a more equitable basis. And that can mean just understanding what these things are and demystifying them. It can mean doing things like we were talking about making benefit sharing really, really aligned with laws in other areas and not overcomplicated. I think if you have to bring a bunch of international climate lawyers in to help people understand the benefits, you failed already. You know, it should be very legible because people distrust illegibility. Companies distrust it, communities distrust it. And so the last point about that is also transparency, I think. So, for instance, also in the benefit sharing mechanism, we don't lay down what people should do. There's a lot of tokenism. Do we build you a classroom? Do we dig you a borehole? So, no. There's not going to be any specification about that. What there's going to be a specification about is the decision-making process that you have to follow and how it has to be documented. And I think one of the enlightened self-interest points that speaks to is conflict management. When you bring a big capital project or a big off-taker or a big economic distortion into the kind of rural production environments that we work in, there are winners and losers, and people fight over it. We all like the word community. Community is a lovely, cuddly word, yeah? Nobody turns the word community away from a party. But that word community also disguises a lot of personal interests, class interests, gender interests, age interests. Can be very conflictual. So we also have to know that we're walking into this situation. You're going to meet some voices that are louder than others, some voices that are obscured, some people who claim to be talking for communities when actually they're talking for themselves or a small group of people. So something like very clear and transparent mechanisms for how to participate, whether it's how to participate in a supply chain or how to make a decision about a community benefit. It's enlightened self-interest because it's conflict risk management. And that's really, really key in frontier markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. I wanted to speak a bit from the corporate side of things. At Proforest, my job is basically to understand how to build the business case based on the climate targets that companies have. And that's a lot more difficult when you talk about people, because putting a monetary value on that is a lot harder. We now have carbon markets, we have a carbon price, but what is the KPI for people? And I think you alluded to it, that the reputational risk is often the main thing, that is compliance. How do we move beyond that? And I think some of the things that we see companies wanting to do but having difficulties because they don't have the business case. So I also reflect that question back to you in how you do that in your work. But in climate projects, oftentimes there's a readiness, there's investment needed into readiness of a farmer. You do regenerative agriculture, and even though it's not true everywhere, you might have a slight drop in productivity before it goes up. So paying a premium or providing support in that transition period is something very straightforward that companies can do, but very few do because you would be paying more per ton of commodity. Now, something else that we work on, it's landscape initiatives. And for those that aren't very familiar with that concept, it is basically multi-stakeholder partnerships within territories to drive sustainable production. And I think that's where the blended finance element also comes in. It's between public, private, philanthropic. It's really trying to pull everything together. And what we are trying to understand is, how does investment into landscapes, which is not just carbon, it's not just people, it's not just nature, it's linking everything together, how does that promote the resilience of that landscape as a whole? And what is the impact, the monetary impact of the commercial actors that are present within that landscape? So it's one of the levers that I personally am very interested in to understand is how much cheaper is a soy crusher's insurance in a landscape that has this landscape governance as compared to one that does not. We live in a world where we need to be able to put things into monetary terms, and to your point, Kautar, I think you're very right. We can't just put everything on companies. We need to help them make the business case, and that's what we're trying to do. I try to do that via climate. I hope that people can become one of those new entry points, but I also ask your help to figure that out, because it's a complex question indeed.
If I may, and I think it would be good to hear from many of you. It's again, and the engagement of companies in just transition. I think there is like the same company can have multiple interests, and these multiple interests, they would be linked to different sources of resources. So there is definitely like companies that will have their boots on the ground and they need to have their social license to operate. So they definitely need to take care of those communities because they're their neighbors. There is also like sourcing areas where there is like a responsible sourcing policy and I need to be clean in my supply chain, so I can also work on those territories. And there's also the investment part, like that is like, it could be linked to some benefit for the companies linked to claims, but more than anything else is like also money that they can get back. And this, I really like the idea of the cooperatives. We have one example in Brazil that is being quite successful, is through the movement of the landless workers, that they developed a special type of investment that is with like people and individuals can invest their money through banks and they get their money back, and this money is used to produce in the cooperative. So you can choose the cooperative that you're supporting, and is a type of blended finance. So they got some philanthropic catalytic capital in the beginning. I wonder, and Fabiana, it would be good to hear from you as well, but also from others if you have experience. Like, what is the role? One thing is to have public-private partnership. Like PCI is also one example. Like you engage with the government and you work together. There is a company decides to put money into it because there is reputational risk. But what about the opportunities of, hey, this is an interesting investment opportunity that has the benefit of bringing some positive outcomes for people, for nature, for climate. But first of all, we'll get our money back. So how, I don't know, it'd be great to hear from you, like how that plays in for Amagi and from what you're seeing, but also for others, like what you see in terms of like companies making decisions on like what are the differences between those two main groups of the investment?
I'm thinking about when I talked about, I think it's so good thing is when I discussed the just transition, I think it's a new concept that try for us the opportunity to discuss the nature and the social issues together. I think it's so good only for this concept because normally then you're thinking about the market. The main issues that you receive the our clients is and about the banks and investors. The main point is about the environmental issues, it's deforestation, it's conversion, it's the policies about this. And the social perspective, it's maybe it's the second point, or the point is not so the main issues that you received for the market. When you talk about the just transition, I think it's a new concept that brings together the social aspect that for me, it's very important because if you don't solve the social problems, you don't solve the environment problems as well. So for me, it's the first point that you need to solve. And after this is possible to discuss the main policies for environmental issues. About the investments, I think it's very important to move the market is have a good commitment. If you have the good commitments for the consumers goods companies, it's possible to, and for the banks, so it's possible to change all the supply value. So I think it's so good to think about public commissions for just transition. I think Amagi has the policies for the environment and the human rights, and they try together bring the some things, but it's not so easy to bring together the main points. When you have the good points for the policies that include the social environment policy, I think it's so good to think about how it's possible to move the market. And when you move the market, it's possible to think about the good investments and the certifications to address the some things and move all the supply value. And for Amagi, it's very special to support the jurisdictional and landscape initiatives because it's possible to think about the scale. So Brazil is so big and it's not so easy to invest in all the areas that you are. And because it is you need to define the high areas that you want to, the special areas that you need to work, and you work together. And then we have the partnership with the Proforest and the PCI inside the Mato Grosso. And when you see a lot of stakeholders work together with the climate issues, environmental issues, social issues, it's possible to transform the landscape. So I think it's a good initiative and a way to give the good results.
Anybody else wants to comment? We're approaching the end of the session. No? We still have a few minutes, though. Oh, good? Okay. Good. Yeah, no, I think it's, well, we did not have the ambition to get out of this 1 hour session with the answers. But I think I like, Fabiana, what you said is like just transition. It can look quite ambitious and maybe like too can I say that, too idealistic sometimes, because it's like, it means like, oh, everything is solved. Like you see rainbows, like, right? You see, like birds flying and everything is perfect. But I think it's really like, it's a new concept that if it can be really, it can really become a buzzword. It can at least help us to bring back people to the center of what we need to solve. And it's where they should never, they should always have been there. So it's really like, what are the tweaks that we need to do in some of the approaches that we already have that can start to bring back people to the center, using this mantra of just transition that can be used in the investment from companies, in the public policies, in the agreements, sectoral agreements, that I think can potentially at least remind us to not forget about what is the effect on people. And if we don't have the people coming first, we won't have like solve climate change. We won't address deforestation. We won't adapt. So I don't know if our co-host wants to say a few words. Yes, and then we can close. Thank you. I'll already say thank you so much for joining. I know it's super warm. I don't know if people that are seeing us, it's very like, it's almost, how to say insalubre? Nah, there is a word like to say like you're suffering. But thank you so much for watching.
Yeah, I just want to thank the people that join us online, join us here. As you said, it's the conditions are a little bit too hot. We're all using reports to. But I wanted to thank both of you as well for putting this session together, for asking, I think, some questions on terms of how to put people back. It's a big question in terms of how can we merge the profit making that can be inclusive and people-centered. And as I said, I think it's the incentive if we can speak the same language. I don't think there is no evil and good. It's just speaking the same language. And then sometimes it comes to the compromise as well, and then to prioritization. From our side into the de-risking, even the due diligence sometimes takes way too long. When we start working with the companies, it takes sometimes to 6 months. For us, our target is 2 months. But in terms of, do you have this? Can I see that? So those are things that if we all have people in the center, that means how can we make it easier on everybody, and how can we stay rainbow, stay idealistic, but then yet practical. And thank you so much.